The hidden strength of people who walk alone don't have friends. We live in a world that romanticizes connection. From the moment we're born, we're told that friendship is essential to a meaningful life, that to be alone is to be deficient. That solitude is a problem to be solved, not a state to be explored. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if those who walk alone, those who don't have friends or don't seek them out, aren't broken, but quietly powerful? What if their solitude is not an absence, but a presence of something deeper, more self-aware, more radically free than society dares to admit? This isn't about glorifying loneliness or pretending that human connection doesn't matter. It does. But we must distinguish between being alone and being lonely. They are not the same thing. Loneliness is a craving unmet. It's the ache of longing. Being alone, on the other hand, is a condition of space. And sometimes the people who live in that space, who walk through life without the constant buzz of social companionship, have discovered something rare. A kind of self-containment, a kind of sovereignty, a kind of psychological independence most of us never touch because we are too busy trying to belong.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Let's be honest, most of us don't choose our friendships consciously. We inherit them, we default into them. We form bonds out of proximity, convenience, or mutual insecurity. We hang on to relationships not because they elevate us, but because they validate us. We fear being alone because we fear what we might find when the noise is gone. Silence can be terrifying when your identity is built on external reflection. But the person who walks alone has already walked through that fire. They've faced the silence. They've met themselves in the quiet. And here's where it gets interesting. When you walk alone, you begin to see the world differently. You become intensely observant, not because you're trying to analyze others, but because you're not distracted by the need to be seen. You watch how people cling to each other, how they perform, how they chase approval, and you realize how much of social life is a game of masks. The alone person stops playing. They start asking different questions. Not how do I fit in, but who am I when no one is watching? And that question, if asked honestly, changes everything. Philosophers like Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and even the Stoics have long praised the virtue of solitude. Not as withdrawal, but as clarity. When you're not entangled in constant social dynamics, you develop a sharper sense of reality. You begin to see through the illusions of status, of popularity, of collective opinion. And while others are swept up in trends and tribal thinking, the lone walker moves through the world with a strange kind of immunity. They are untouchable not because they are invincible, but because they are unentangled. But solitude doesn't come without a cost. It demands courage. It demands the willingness to be misunderstood. People who walk alone are often judged, pitied, or even feared. Society doesn't know what to do with someone who doesn't need its approval, and so it tries to pathologize them. They must be depressed. They're probably antisocial. Something must have happened to them. But what if nothing happened? What if they simply saw the machinery of the social world too clearly and decided to step outside it? This is where true strength begins. When you are alone not by accident, but by choice, you begin to cultivate internal resources most people never develop. You learn how to regulate your emotions without venting them. You learn how to process your thoughts without echo chambers. You learn how to create meaning without applause. Your inner world becomes rich, layered, and self-sustaining. And while others depend on the presence of others to feel real, you become real from the inside out. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you spent a whole day without speaking to anyone, not because you were forced to, but because you chose to? And what did that day teach you about yourself? If you can't answer that, maybe you've never truly met yourself. Maybe you've always seen your reflection in the eyes of others, but never in the still water of your own mind. The person who walks alone has met themselves in that stillness. They've sat with their own thoughts long enough to stop fearing them. They've faced the monsters that silence reveals and emerged with something more valuable than confidence, groundedness. And here's the twist. The more grounded you become in your solitude, the more optional social relationships start to feel. Not in a cynical way, but in a liberating one. You stop chasing people who don't see you. You stop shrinking to fit in. You stop performing. And paradoxically, the more whole you become in your aloneness, the more magnetic you become to others. Not because you need them, but because your presence becomes rare. It radiates peace, depth, power. In the next part, we'll explore how solitude becomes a forge for radical self-mastery and why people who walk alone often develop an internal discipline that makes them unstoppable in any domain they pursue. The Forge of Solitude, how walking alone builds invincible discipline. There's a quiet forge hidden in the heart of solitude. It doesn't look like much from the outside, just a person moving through life without a visible circle, without the constant hum of social activity. But inside, something powerful is happening. Something most people never experience. The person who walks alone is being shaped in ways that those surrounded by others often never realize. Because when no one is watching, no one is clapping, and no one is pushing you forward, the only fuel you have is your own will. And that is where true discipline is born. Most people are held together by their environment. Their routines are social. Their habits are shaped by expectations. They go to the gym because someone's waiting. They work because their boss is watching. They behave because they fear judgment. But remove the audience and many collapse. They don't have an inner structure strong enough to hold them upright when the external scaffolding disappears. But the person who walks alone has already felt that emptiness and filled it with something of their own design. Discipline in solitude is not about punishment. It's about alignment. When you're alone, your actions either serve your future or sabotage it. There's no one else to blame. You become acutely aware of your choices. You start to see the quiet cause and effect of your habits. And because you're not distracted by the noise of other people's lives, you can tune into the rhythm of your own. You begin to ask yourself, what do I really want? What am I willing to suffer for? These questions become more than philosophical, they become practical. Because in solitude, you face resistance without witnesses. There's no one cheering you on when you wake up early. No one clapping when you deny the temptation. No one noticing when you keep your word to yourself. And that's the power. When you learn to act with integrity when no one is watching, you become unbreakable when they are. Think of solitude as a kind of mental monastery, a place where you refine your self-command, where you learn how to delay gratification, how to endure discomfort, how to hold focus in a world addicted to distraction. Most people scatter their energy trying to keep up socially, emotionally, and digitally. But the person who walks alone gathers that energy inward. They use it to build, to study, to train, to create. They don't need to post it or prove it. The results speak for themselves. And here's the deeper truth. Discipline born in solitude is sustainable. Why? Because it's not reactive. It's not based on fear or approval. It's rooted in clarity. When you walk alone, you realize that no one is coming to save you. No one is going to build your dream for you. No one is going to fix your habits, heal your mind, or unlock your potential. That realization hits hard, but it also wakes you up. You stop waiting. You start building. You take ownership, not because it feels good, but because it's the only way forward. This is why so many great thinkers, artists, and warriors throughout history have spent long periods in solitude. Not because they hated people, but because they understood the value of uninterrupted becoming. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal in silence. Nietzsche walked alone through the mountains. Bruce Lee trained in solitude to master his craft. These were not isolated men, they were forged by isolation. And their solitude gave them something the crowd couldn't: depth, direction, and discipline. Ask yourself this: if no one knew what you were working on, would you still do it? If no one ever praised your effort, would you still show up? If you were the last person on earth, would you still keep your promises to yourself? These are the questions that shape the person who walks alone. They don't rely on external structure. They become the structure. They don't wait for motivation, they generate it. They don't collapse in silence, they build in it. And the result is a kind of strength that's hard to describe but impossible to ignore. A quiet, unshakable presence. A mind that doesn't flinch. A life that moves with purpose, not noise. In the next part, we'll explore how walking alone sharpens your perception of reality, revealing truths most people miss and how this heightened awareness becomes a hidden superpower. Seeing through the noise, the superpower of the isolated mind when you're constantly surrounded by people, by opinions, by the subtle and not so subtle demands of society, something strange happens to your perception. It dulls. It becomes reactive rather than reflective. You stop really seeing the world for what it is, and instead, you start seeing it through the lens of what will they think, or how do I compare, or what should I be chasing. But the person who walks alone, who spends vast amounts of time in their own company, begins to see through that noise. Their mind, no longer shaped by constant input, begins to sharpen in ways that most people will never experience. This sharpening of perception isn't some mystical gift. It's a byproduct of silence. When you don't have friends constantly talking in your ear, when you're not tangled in social obligations, when you're not performing for an audience, your mind begins to recalibrate. You start noticing the subtle, the patterns, the way people talk, not just to you, but at you, the way most conversations are veiled transactions, the way trends rise and fall like waves trying to distract you from the deeper current underneath. And once you notice these things, you can't unsee them. This is the superpower of the isolated mind, clarity. You begin to operate on a different frequency. While others are caught in the momentum of the crowd, the person who walks alone moves with intention. They don't just react to life, they observe it. They dissect it. And from that observation comes understanding. And from understanding, power. Because the moment you can see clearly, you no longer have to play the game everyone else is playing. Take a moment and ask yourself, how much of your life is shaped by noise? How many of your choices are reactions rather than decisions? How many of your beliefs are yours, not inherited, not absorbed, not reflexive, but truly yours? Most people can't answer that. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they've never been alone long enough to hear their own voice beneath the echo of the world. The person who walks alone has. They've sat in the stillness long enough to separate signal from static. They know when a thought is truly theirs. They know when a decision is driven by intuition, not pressure. That kind of self-awareness is rare. It's not taught. It's discovered. And solitude is the terrain where it's found. But this clarity doesn't just apply to the internal world, it extends outward. People who walk alone often see others more clearly, too. Without the haze of emotional attachment or social need, they can observe behavior with almost surgical precision. They sense motives. They detect patterns. They're not cynical, but they're not naive either. They know how to listen not just to words, but to what's underneath them. In a world of performative connection, that kind of insight is almost supernatural. This awareness becomes a form of protection. It's harder to manipulate someone who sees clearly. It's harder to pressure someone who doesn't need your validation. It's harder to distract someone who knows exactly what they're here to do. That's why the person who walks alone is often misunderstood. Their calmness looks like arrogance. Their selectiveness looks like coldness. Their detachment looks like superiority. But none of that is true. They've just chosen to see clearly, and clarity always threatens illusion. And yet, this superpower comes with a burden. When you see through the noise, you also see the emptiness in much of what others chase. You see people striving for things that won't satisfy them. You see friendships that are shallow, conversations that are hollow, lives that are performative. It can be lonely to carry that vision, but it's a noble loneliness. It's the price of seeing truth in a world addicted to illusion. So ask yourself, if you could see the world exactly as it is, stripped of all its social filters, would you want to? Could you handle it? And more importantly, what would you do with that clarity? Because that's the final layer of the isolated mind's power: responsibility. Once you see clearly, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer follow blindly. You are now accountable to a deeper truth, and that truth will demand things from you: honesty, courage, action. It won't let you sleepwalk through life. It will call you to build something real. In the final part, we'll explore how walking alone prepares you for leadership, not the kind driven by ego, but the rare kind forged in silence, self-knowledge, and vision. The leader who needed no followers, how solitude shapes true influence. We often think of leadership as a loud, visible role, someone standing at the front, commanding attention, rallying crowds, collecting followers like trophies. But real leadership, the kind that shapes history, changes lives, and bends reality, isn't rooted in charisma or applause. It's rooted in alignment, in clarity, in inner authority. And this kind of leadership is almost always forged in solitude. You don't become a true leader by being around people all the time. You become one by walking alone long enough to know who you are, what you stand for, and what you're willing to walk away from. The person who walks alone may not look like a leader at first glance. They're not flashy. They don't chase attention. They don't need to be needed. But that's exactly why they're powerful. Because they lead from being, not from wanting. They don't lead to fill a void, they lead because they've already filled it. And this is the paradox. The more at peace you are with solitude, the more magnetic your presence becomes. People sense something different in you. A calm, a depth, a focus, something they can't name but want to follow. Why? Because we live in a world of noise, and the person who has mastered silence becomes a lighthouse. In a culture of confusion, the one who walks with clarity becomes a compass. In a time where everyone is looking outward for answers, the person who has looked inward and survived what they found becomes a source of rare truth. That's what leadership is at its core, not controlling others, but embodying a truth so strongly that others are compelled to rise to it. But here's the catch. You can't fake that. You can't imitate it. You can't read about it or borrow it. You have to earn it. And the only place that kind of leadership is born is in the wilderness of solitude. When you've spent enough nights with your doubts, your fears, your broken pieces and didn't run. When you've held your own hand in the dark. When you've built discipline not for applause, but for survival. Then, and only then, do you carry the kind of presence that can lead without needing followers. That's what makes the person who walks alone different. They don't need to lead. They aren't trying to be seen. They're just living in alignment with something deep and unshakable. But because that kind of congruence is so rare, others naturally look to them. Not because they're perfect, not because they're loud, but because they've become whole. They've done what most people are afraid to do, face themselves. And in doing so, they've become someone others can trust. Not because they have all the answers, but because they've asked the hardest questions. So ask yourself, could you lead if no one followed? Could you speak truth if no one clapped? Could you stay aligned if everyone walked away? These are the questions that define real influence. And the person who walks alone has already answered them. They've lived their life in a way that doesn't depend on validation. They've made peace with being misunderstood. They've learned how to hold their vision in the silence. And because of that, when the time comes to speak, to act, to guide, they do so from a place of deep authority. Not borrowed, not performative, but earned through solitude. This is the hidden strength of people who walk alone. They are not lost. They are not lesser. They are not broken. They are becoming. And in their becoming, they remind us all that the most powerful path is not always the most crowded. That sometimes the most influential people are the ones who spent years in silence before ever speaking a word. So if you find yourself walking alone, don't rush to fix it. Don't chase noise. Don't beg for belonging. Listen, build, sharpen, dig. Because you may be in the middle of the most important transformation of your life. You may be becoming the kind of person who doesn't just follow the world but quietly, powerfully shapes it, without needing a single follower to do it.